Hello and welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. I'm Guillaume, your host, and each week I'm fortunate to share with you stories from climate tech founders, investors, and corporations sharing their unique insights into this fast-moving industry. Eventually, like me, you will learn, discover, and get inspired by those unique men and women who are contributing to the fight against climate change, and I hope it will help you to take a step in this formidable movement. So before we start, I just want to share a few words about us, as this podcast is just the tip of the iceberg of what we do at Startup Basecamp to support climate tech movement. Our mission is to accelerate capital deployment towards climate tech founders, allowing them to focus on scaling their solutions. How do we do that? Every day, we help founders access to resources and connections and gain the visibility they need to expand their growth. We do this in a number of ways with a membership platform, a Slack group with a growing number of founders, investors, and experts from around the world. And recently, we went one step further with the matching services to connect founders with top climate tech investors. Keep in mind that we are able to do all of this thanks to the support of our listeners and our members. So please like and subscribe, share one episode with a friend, join a community, and if you haven't already done so, make a small donation to support our work. It really means the world to us. And now, enjoy the show! Hi everyone, today on the Tech for Climate podcast, I meet with Francesca Whitehead, VP at Fifth Wall, specifically working on their climate fund. Fifth Wall are the largest asset manager focused on modernizing, future-proofing, and decarbonizing the built environment, and their LPs include 110 of the largest owners, operators, and developers of real estate across 15 countries. Currently, I have 125 portfolio companies across both climate tech and prop tech. I was excited to speak with Francesca, who grew up in Vietnam and Hong Kong before heading to the US to study, and has been there until very recently when she was asked to relocate to London to jumpstart Fifth Wall's European climate tech, investing as a fund. Francesca started her career in climate tech immediately after university, working in Goldman Investment Banking covering natural resources before joining the KKR Global Impact Fund's inaugural team. She then went on to join G2VP fund focused on applying emerging tech, improving inefficiencies and sustainability in traditional industries across a variety of sectors before joining Fifth Wall at the end of last year. In this episode, Francesca deep dives with us into the mining industry's impact on climate change and the importance of introducing sustainable practices and solutions. She speaks about the negative impacts of the industry, not only from emissions, but also pollution, waste, land degradation, and human rights. We discuss existing solutions from electric vehicles to the electrification of machinery, and also the potential role of corporate ventures in driving innovation and sustainability in the mining industry. The second part of the show, Francesca gives tips for founders who are fundraising and shares the differences she noticed in founders' pitches between Europe and the US. She also shares a routine for maintaining a healthy work-life balance and her love for podcasts. Francesca, welcome to the show. Hi, Francesca. Welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. I'm super excited to have you here with us today. I'm looking for this great opportunity to hear your story and get up to speed on what you guys are looking at with Fifth Wall, the largest venture capital firm focused on technology for the global real estate industry. And it sounds that at Fifth Wall, you guys invest in technology companies tackling some of the most pressing real-world problems, such as climate change, for a better and more sustainable world. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a long time that we know each other already, and we've been exchanging quite a bit. So I'm super excited to finally have you on the show. So before we start, that's the tradition here. Can you give us a 30-second introduction about Fifth Wall?
Yeah, happy to. Some of which you've already covered, but I'll just kind of go through the whole thing here. So Fifth Wall, as you said, largest asset manager focused on modernizing, future-proofing, and decarbonizing the built environment. And with that, we kind of have 3 billion AUM across all the different funds that we have. So our LP base includes 110 of the largest owners, operators, developers of real estate across 15 countries. Just to give a couple examples, that's like things like CBRE, Segro, Related, Toll Brothers, Lennar, British Land, Marriott, Hilton, BNP Paribas. So we have over 125 portfolio companies in what I believe to be the category leading companies across both climate tech and prop tech. So as it's implied, I'm part of the climate fund. And so the climate fund, specifically at Fifth Wall, is focused on investing in solutions that bring the built environment to net zero. The built environment is one of the largest industries. It's an incredibly important industry, but it's also a significant contributor to global emissions. About 40% of overall global carbon emissions can be tied to the built environment. And so when we kind of think about making the building net zero, that's everything from things that are feeding into the building, like the grid, the embodied carbon in the construction process, to actually operating the building itself, waste coming out of it, what are the tenants getting delivered, just you're thinking about your scope 3, energy used by the data centers, et cetera, et cetera. And then also on the other side, like what's coming out of the building on the end of life side of things, all the products that are being manufactured in the building as well. And then kind of final chunk is, it's a very hard to abate industry. So how do we leverage the carbon markets to kind of help with this net zero transition? So that's a little bit about us.
And it's a lot, which is super exciting to see so many interesting people and putting resource capital and aggregating the industry around a better and cleaner world with tremendous opportunities to change the game here. So let's start from the top. We like to focus first on the guest as a person. We prefer that than just the full history and resume and education and background there. So who are you as a person? I mean, what are you passionate about? What do you do besides supporting and investing in these exciting companies? I mean, what makes you feel inspired? Like, as I always ask, who is Francesca?
Yeah, so I mean, I can start with, I guess, like feeling inspired. So, I mean, there's one part on the venture capital side, like what gets me excited as a VC. I think a lot of us probably would say something similar, but it's really wanting to be the one that finds sort of that next big founder in whatever that sector may be. Then whatever the one you may operate in, being the person that finds that person is sort of my North Star, at least, but I think I can speak for a lot of VCs in that regard. And then on the other side, with the climate tech side, it's like I grew up in Vietnam and Hong Kong mostly. I think some of the worst parts of climate change, which is kind of front and center for me from such a young age. And so just thinking about the environment is a very big part of kind of my North Star as well. I've spent my entire career focused on climate tech. So that's kind of where I have always been focused on. And that's where I hope to continue spending the rest of my career.
So maybe tell us a little bit about your, previous work-life experience prior to joining Fifth Wall. I mean, if you could recall maybe one or two pieces of experiences in a way that gave you an edge to join the firm.
Yeah, why not? So, I mean, as I mentioned, grew up Hong Kong, Vietnam, and the UK mostly. And then I went to the US for university and have stayed ever since. And that's where the vast majority of my career has been. It was there fully until recently. I started my career at Goldman Investment Banking. And I was covering natural resources whilst I was there. And this is where I'd say is where I began my journey of understanding sort of the needs and complexities of many of these traditional industries that I now spend my day-to-day thinking about investing in. So, and then after Goldman, I was part of the inaugural team at the KKR Global Impact Fund. Here, I was sourcing and working in deals across transportation, energy transition, advanced materials, food and ag, and also K through 12. The deal that I worked on whilst I was there was a buyout of our. The deal that I worked on whilst I was there was for a buyout in a company called Graduation Alliance, and so at the time was sort of the largest deal to date. And then right before Fifth Wall, I was at a fund called G2VP. It's a growth-focused climate fund that spun out of Kleiner Perkins. There, I focused on kind of variety of sectors as well, but really what their special source is applying emerging tech to improving inefficiencies and sustainability in traditional industries. And my coverage areas were fashion, construction, supply chains, food and ag, voluntary carbon markets. And I was involved in G2's transactions in Produce Pay, which is kind of ag fintech, Pivot Bio replacing synthetic nitrogen in the row crop growing process, Trove, B2B re-commerce platform, and then finally Oyster, which is kind of a digitized PEO business. And then I joined Fifth Wall kind of end of last year, normally based in New York, and I was asked to move out to London beginning of this year to really start kind of jumpstart our European climate tech investing as a fund. We have a global mandate, but no one had really been dedicated to sourcing here, meeting founders in Europe, going to European conferences, and just kind of embedding us in the VC ecosystem here. So that's what I've been doing and have been doing that for a little bit now. And then just to quickly run through some of the deals that I've worked on since being at Fifth Wall. So one is N0, carbon accounting company. Second one's Solar Cycle, a solar panel recycling business. We did both the Series A and the infrastructure sleeve. And then Voltaire, it's a company based in Prague that is kind of marketplace for heat pump procurement and installation as well. So
exciting.
Just yeah. And as I said, the theme is always climate.
So I think doing this bridge between both sides of the Atlantic is definitely super important. And European are looking towards the US, and US is looking toward the European ecosystem too. So it's super exciting. So prior speaking a little bit more in detail about Fifth Wall, I'd like to take a zoom out and a step back and discover a bit more with you the mining sector, the challenges and opportunity. Why does it matter in the context of the fight against climate change? I mean, why is it sometimes such like a hate-love relationship? As we all know, we need those minerals to empower the electrification, the decarbonization of our economy. So maybe we can start by, if you could give us to the audience your overview of the current situation in terms of the impact that the mining industry at large has and its contribution to GHG emissions, but far beyond, as we were speaking prior to the interview, it's not just the emission. I think mining is the footprint is way deeper than that. Maybe let's cover that. Try to understand the magnitude of the problem that we're talking about. If you have some data points, maybe that you could share with us.
Absolutely, and I always we'll start with kind of the elevator pitch for why mining tech is so important. Is it's a sort of the essential component for us to transition to a net zero economy. We are moving from an oil and gas industry to a metals and mining industry. We can't have electric cars. We can't have energy storage. We can't have solar panels without mining. So that's sort of the why it's so important and why we all need to care about it. Elevator pitch. But in terms of some of the love-hate relationship, as you say, some of the stats around it, is that even right now, before we've kind of made that transition, it contributes to 5% of global emissions. And the other things that we talk through, it's that there's also a tremendous amount of water pollution. There's a lot of toxic chemicals and there's a lot of water that's used during kind of the extraction process. And so with that, a lot of that can kind of be leached into local communities and into the water sources as well. Another piece, mining is quite wasteful with the way we currently do it. When you kind of are operating a mine, a lot of it actually just kind of stays in the ground, becomes this slurry mix of chemicals and crushed rock that isn't actually that useful. And so it's about 20% of what's extracted from a mine that's actually useful. And the rest of it is just kind of left in the ground to stay there, which right now, I think globally, it's about 280 billion tons of tailings kind of exist. And this is not only bad for the environment, it's also bad for the mining company that's already it's a sunk cost financially to build a mine. Why wouldn't they want to extract more out of that? And then going forward, they also have to spend money to manage it so that it doesn't cause negative environmental impacts. All of that. And then land degradation is sort of another one as well. Mines, again, kind of the way we build them right now, they're quite destructive to the local land. So it's soil erosion, destruction of habitat, deforestation. All of these are kind of problems as we are accelerating and thinking about coming to net zero. And just a couple of stats on that net zero transition as well. So, they're sort of estimated that in order for us to fully transition, that just for lithium itself, we're going to have to 5x from 2020 to 2030 in terms of demand for lithium alone, let alone all the other metals that are also kind of part of that energy transition.
So to get a deeper understanding of this, tremendous change, and thanks for already like framing the context here. I mean, prior to dive into more like the emerging solutions that you see, could you tell us? I mean, maybe share with us a little bit, like, I mean, what about the type of elements, raw material extracted, which are the ones that are the most impactful, creating the most impact? Do you see like different in terms of like the type of mine in itself? Where are those mines located? I mean, are we speaking about like just the US or like Australia or like other countries? I mean, is there like any like specific areas where the impact again and therefore the regulation will be different, I believe. So I mean,
Yeah.
and in this value chain of the mining process itself, as you have been digging and trying to understand how things works and where things are not working as well, where do you see those impacts? So help us to understand that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, one thing on that specific topic too, I think about 60% of rare earth materials right now is mined in China. And so again, as we kind of think about us trying to be less dependent on China, US and EU both have these mandates of trying to do that. Obviously, this is a big push with that. If we're kind of transitioning to a net zero economy, but 60% of the raw materials are coming from there, that's probably not kind of in keeping with what we are trying to achieve as an economy. So that's kind of one piece. And again, as we all know, there are a lot of mines like that are in like the Congo, for example, where there are kind of potential human rights issues even that, and again, not environmentally part of that kind of equation, but there are human rights issues that are being that are under consideration too. Australia also has a lot of mines, as does the US, but those are kind of the things I would highlight specifically to kind of to answer that question. And then in terms of the second part of your question around the metals itself, again, mining in and of itself is already bad, but there are certainly ones that are worse. So mining for or producing like aluminum is one of the worst ones. Yeah, so that's kind of one that immediately pops to mind. But all of it does produce a lot of emissions because right now, vast majority of mines are in very, very remote locations. They can't rely on the grid, right? Or they can't rely on there's some solutions around energy storage and batteries on site, but largely they're still all the machinery is driven by generators. And that's a lot of the emission comes from. And then also the transportation costs. Given that it's so remote, how do we get it to where it actually needs to be processed?
And what about the processing of those rocks? I mean, like you extract them. I've been, traveling in Australia. I saw those humongous trucks, like probably 3 times my size, like moving around those like huge blocks. But then they all go to a processing plant. Like, how is that processing plant also like in terms of like emission and impact? Is that something large, or is really the extraction per se and the explosive that you need to put in the ground to that has the larger impact? If anything can be weighted.
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm weighting them against one another. I think we need to reduce all of it because mining it's just a hard to beat industry, similar to real estate. But I don't think we're going to get to fully zero, probably in my lifetime in this industry. And so we should try and reduce at every single step of the way. And yes, processing also has a tremendously impact on the environment as well. Same as any other industrial process. Of course, it's also very bad for the environment.
So prior speaking about like, the current solution in place and the upcoming ones in terms of mining technology that you see, can you maybe just refresh the audience in terms of like, how is the market organized? I mean, is it like a fully distributed market? Is it like few large players who are owning the main different categories and has the larger extraction power there? I mean, what are the incentives also for those ones in a way to clean their operation and go to a more sustainable mining process and approach? And
yeah. So on the first part of your questions in terms of the players, there is a benefit of having economies of scale in this industry. So on the extraction side, also on the processing side. And so there are kind of some very, very large players that do control a lot of the market. And I think we know some of those names. It's things like BHP, Glencore, Rio Tinto, Vale, kind of et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of different players, Anglo-American. So there are some really large players, but there is actually a long tail of other companies that own one or two mines on something specific. So there is kind of variety there. But yes, in terms of the vast majority of the industry, it is controlled by those big players that we know the names of.
So, knowing that, there's all of those large players, what is the incentive for them in a way to, maybe it's the stick or maybe it's the carrot. I don't know. What do they, how is the current situation? Are they incentivized to move towards a cleaner, mining process at large, or it's still something that is a little bit up in the air, and maybe the ESG report is the one that they wanna push for?
Yeah, I do think so. I'm less familiar with the regulation in Australia, but from my understanding, the government does have pretty strict reporting requirements for publicly traded companies. And a lot of the companies we just mentioned are Australian companies. So it's kind of one thing that I think probably is driving some of it. And then also, in terms of the kind of ESG reporting side of things, mining companies, they know that this is an issue. They're 5% of global emissions. Like, they know this. It's not like it's news to them. But there historically hasn't been that much focus on spending in mining technology. I think it's like 0.5% of venture dollars goes into mining. So that's obviously a very small amount. And so a lot of them have had to develop the tech themselves. They're being a little bit left behind and a little worried about it too. I think a lot of the pressure in the long run will come from actually other companies. If you are sourcing anything that's based on metals, your scope 3 emission is going to quickly also include what's happening at the mine. And so I think there's going to be a lot of downward pressure in that way. But also mining industries, again, as I said earlier, it's a very, very difficult to abate industry. So again, they will definitely they're looking ahead to kind of get ahead of this problem. And a lot of these mining companies actually do have corporate venture arms. Like, I know BHP does, I know Rio Tinto does. And so they are trying to get ahead of this and kind of find those new technologies and start implementing them internally as well.
Thank you so much for sharing this overall context. So now that we get a better understanding of this of the problem here, let's go deeper into the low-hanging fruit and more the long-term alternatives solution to clean up the mining sector in itself. So maybe let's start with your overview of the main existing solution in place today, prior to speak about the future innovation that you see in the labs or like earlier stage ventures. If you can maybe pick a few of them, because we know it's a large, large sectors, but which are the ones that in a way are in place today and have been maybe enforced in the last decade? So we know that there is like those large companies are aware of and trying to move towards the right direction. What are the existing solutions that recently were put in place at a larger scale?
So I think there are a couple of them here. So I kind of already hinted to some of these. As I said, transportation is obviously a big chunk of emissions as well. We do have solutions around transportation. You can have electric fleets to kind of manage that. So that's kind of one immediate one that comes to mind. Others are also the machinery on the ground. Again, these can also be electrified and use battery powers or whatever it may be. And I've also come across a few startups, like one that comes to mind is Instagrid, that they actually use it in construction and mining, but it's battery packs for charging like on site, so to replace the generators. So those are just some immediate things that come to mind. And then other ones, and this is where it kind of touches more on our portfolio companies, is that you can also do better at, and it's less for mining companies to do this, to be clear, but you can also do more to reuse the metals we've already extracted. And so that's where kind of the circular economy play comes in. And so for us, we have cyclic rare earth materials recycling, ascend elements, battery recycling, and solar cycle, solar panel recycling. They break it all back down to the kind of those raw materials, and you can put that back into the system. So we're reducing the amount that needs to be extracted. And in theory, that sounds like it's not great for the mining companies, but I think there's just an endless amount that needs to be done across the board, and the amount that they're going to have to grow to meet the kind of net zero demand, there's still plenty of room for them to continue growing, whilst we're also trying to increase the life of all the materials we already have.
So speaking about the future of mining and those emerging alternatives, and you already mentioned some of them, do you see like any other ones that you could pinpoint that are really that have very interesting potential? Some of them might have also some challenges at the early stage, as we all know for companies. Which one are the most promising and most exciting for you in that sense?
So there are three categories that I find most exciting, at least. So first one, I'm going to go on the back of the value chain here, is around tailings. So as I already said, only 20% of the mine things are actually extracted from the mine, and it's a liability for the mining company itself. And so how do we extract more kind of from the tailings itself? Can we go back and find useful materials from those? Probably. And so how are we kind of doing that? And so that's kind of one piece that I really like. And there are a variety of companies that can do them across different metals as well. So just one that pops to mind is AGT tailings, for example, or Phoenix tailings. And they like extract kind of from the tailings itself, trying to increase the useful life of them. And then on the other side, kind of tangentially related, is what type of new machinery are we thinking about to actually drill into areas that probably wasn't economical to do a big full mine, or increase the amount we can actually extract during the extraction process. So there's kind of a variety of interesting plays there. So again, one that immediately pops to mind is a company called Novamera. They basically have a precision drilling tool. Like that's kind of interesting. We can go into deeper and a more precise way of getting into smaller pockets of minerals. So that's kind of another one. And then other ones is just like increasing and improving the process of mining. There's a very limited amount of tech right now used across the entire process. And I mean, even like software to improve all of that. What's kind of the health and safety tracking tools that people are using? How are you actually managing and tracking the amount that's being extracted and where it's going next? Like, are you tracing across your supply chain? All of these questions, again, another full category of things that I think are pretty interesting. And then final one, if we're talking about net zero, of course, we have to talk about lithium. And so that entire value chain, like who's doing it in terms of better extraction of the lithium? Is there more smarter ways to do it? How are we refining it in a more precise way to also increase the amount of power that comes out of that? So the two that kind of, again, pops to mind. So it's like Summit Nanotech is one. Lilac is a big one, of course. And then mangrove on the refining side.
And what about deep sea mining? I mean, I heard about that. Yeah. It's also like a lot of like potential controversy here. I see all of those like little like rare mineral earth like balls of like little pellets or whatever you want to name them on the floor of the ocean. Do you see like a real potential there, or do you think that there is probably a thin line that might be dangerous to cross there?
I worry that it's a thin line that's dangerous to cross. Like, I just think we just don't know enough about the ocean, just as a human species. It's still a little bit confusing to us. There's so much we don't know, especially as you kind of go deeper into the ocean. We really don't know that much. And so I just worry that we're going to have really bad unintended consequences to the ecosystem there. And I know we have part of the reason we're in this predicament now of needing to reduce as fast as possible is because we had lots of unintended consequences to our land ecosystem. So let's not also add to the water ecosystem.
So taking a macro approach and stepping back a little bit, I mean, could you tell us a bit more like about the US advantages and maybe weaknesses in regard of innovation and production of this new technology that could lead to a mining sector fully or at least more sustainable? How do you compare US maybe in terms of innovation compared to China and the EU that now you're like, at least your footprint here too?
Yeah, exactly. And I imagine I'll continue covering EU even when I move back to the US in the fall. But kind of besides the point, I think one of the things that the US often has over Europe when it comes to venture ecosystem is that it's historically been a lot better. Sorry, not a lot better. It has historically been a lot bigger, which means that there's just a lot more capital flowing kind of all around. And so like, if you're a mining tech startup, you probably are quite capital intensive. And so if with that in mind, that's great if there's kind of more capital flowing into the sector. But it's only gotten 0.5% of venture dollars historically, as I said. And so again, clearly there needs more to be done. And I actually think the corporate CVCs in this regard are probably better positioned than most to really capture on this because it is a really complex industry. Like I've dug into it a little bit by, doing this deep dive, of course, but ultimately, like, I'm not a geologist. And so like we should lean on those people with those expertise to find kind of the right solution for doing this without the unintended consequences that I mentioned. And the US and EU and Australia, all of which they do have universities that are targeting and focus on this. Again, I'm more familiar with the US market in this regard, but Colorado School of Mines. It's a great university. It's specifically focused on mining. That's kind of where I would look into to find kind of new things emerging and coming into the market. And just one thing on the regulation side, both the EU and the US, IRA and EU Green New Deal, we want to onshore as much of this as possible. And so there is money that's focused on kind of onshoring some of these metals.
Okay. So to close this section and kind of wrap up all the different thoughts that you put out there here during this first part of the interview, I mean, what would be therefore the major constraint that you have identified to clean up the mining industry? I mean, do you see any major roadblocks that might not be also, obvious at first? Is it like a need of new policies? And I mean, you mentioned like on both sides of the Atlantic, there is those push there, but is that sufficient enough? I mean, or maybe it's a lack of international coordination, or maybe like some funding as well, as you mentioned, like $0.5 we're going to the ecosystem in itself. So what needs to happen to accelerate the movement, and in which timeline it sounds realistic to you?
Yeah. I think when it comes to sort of a lot of the different segments, when we're talking about climate tech, this is applicable to what I'm about to say. It's just that climate change is really complicated, and we're talking about very complex, multifaceted industries. And so we need kind of a holistic approach to solve any of this. And yeah, it's applicable to mining too. It's like, we do need the large corporates that already exist. We do need venture dollars and private equity dollars to kind of help grow some of these companies. We need universities to train the next kind of wave of people. And we also need government regulation. We need it all to kind of work together in one ecosystem. Because if you lose kind of one of them, the whole system sort of breaks. Like, another kind of data point, like mining has actually been losing people year over year. It's not a very popular university degree at this point. And so they actually have lower number of people going into university to do mining. That's obviously a huge problem for us. Like, how do we bolster that? So I think it's all of the above when we're kind of thinking about this. You really do need every single component to be working together, everyone to be incentivized to actually kind of achieve this decarbonization and increasing sustainability. But then to also answer the second part of the question there, in terms of why it hasn't necessarily happened historically. So, I mean, mining, same as any of these other traditional industries like food and ag or real estate, whatever it may be, is slow to adopt technology and has been historically. I think there's a sort of a shift in mentality that's starting to happen, but that is still the case, that it is slower. They just kind of know now, maybe it's like financially incentivized, but like they need to start extracting a lot more and a lot faster to kind of meet the demand that's coming. And for whatever reason, that means that they're likely going to adopt more technology. And that's great. And so that's kind of one of the things. And the other one, we sort of hinted on this, the supply chain is really concentrated. This oligopoly style supply chain does also make it hard for startups to break into. And so again, that's starting to shift because we are wanting to have less reliance on all these different things. And I think COVID kind of also highlighted the people don't want to be reliant on, one specific location and things like that. And so the supply chain is starting to shift now as well. Regulation side, we're starting to see that come through. That's great. The IRA and EU Green New Deal is kind of first things around at least providing capital in that way. I think we'll start seeing additional waves of regulation come through to actually put more stricter environmental standards on it. Again, you can kind of see it coming through more like UN and things like that when it comes to mines in the Congo. But I'd like to see it come through like Australian government actually regulating it. And they already have, but being harsher and stricter on it as well. And I think we'll see that more and more. And then final one, mining startups are really capital intensive, same as any other climate tech industry. Not all of them, but a lot of climate tech is, of course, very capital intensive. And so all of those things that I just mentioned do kind of make it less appealing, I guess, traditionally for venture dollars, right? Because it increases our timelines and makes it harder for us to predict our ability to actually make our returns. Again, why we need government money and maybe foundation money to supplement where our venture dollars and private equity money can't meet those timelines.
Timeline, 5, 10, 20, 30, 2050? Or you think that there's so many different pieces to put together and like you're forced to activate that it's probably very difficult to put like a reasonable timeline, but I guess the increasing demand will definitely accelerate things in the right way too.
I really think it will accelerate everything. And the other part is, I do think you can already see it, that mining companies are implementing a lot of these things. And so depends what you mean by the timeline, right? Are we getting to net zero? That's a long way away, but are we reducing emissions? I think that's already, we'll start seeing that kind of with the next wave of mines that they'll put out.
Thank you so much for all of those super valuable insights in the mining industry and the mining tech emerging category that is there that you guys are looking at. So very exciting. So we all know that capital is definitely super important for early stage companies. Potentially having like large fund with well-known funds on the cap table is also something very interesting. But what do you specifically, you guys like provide to those companies besides and eventually this access to the network of LPs that you mentioned? How do you support those founders? What are in a way, the challenges that you see at their stage, the earlier stage, and how do you try to address those challenges internally to help them to go to the next step?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously, it's a very challenging thing to do, but I would say a couple of things that sort of make Fifth Wall differentiated, and is sort of our secret sauce, I guess, is, so I think there are three kind of key things here. So first one, we have really deep industry knowledge and expertise within kind of the built environment. That's kind of how we build our success, is around predicting the pain points the built environment may experience and how to scale solutions to actually solve these problems. And so with that, we work really closely with our LPs to like listen to them about like, what are these pain points? Like, what are they? Is the solution that we've come up with, does it make sense for them? Why might it create even more pain points on the other side? And so it's like really something that we pride ourselves on, and we spend a lot of time thinking about that and talking to our LPs to kind of address that. Second one is we kind of have this network effect. And so, as you said, we do have this great LP base. So for a lot of startups, that's incredible for them because it gives them access to, of course, these LPs, so that they're these kind of customers, a vast asset base that they can kind of immediately tap into. And then the LP side is that they get hand selected by us, cutting edge solutions to solve some of the problems that they're experiencing on a day-to-day. And actually, I think it goes kind of in both directions where sometimes the LP will give us ideas, being like, hey, this is a company we came across that is solving this thing for us. Maybe it works for you as a good investment and for some other LPs. So that's kind of one other one. And then the third one is that we have a really strong marketing team and marketing engine. We know that it's really important to help our portfolio companies get their story out there. Because when you're an early stage company, that is a big part of the journey, is having people being familiar with you, reaching out to you as potential customers, also potential future investors as well.
So you're excited by tokenization and all the blockchain-based technology? Or I thought it was like a little bit outdated on the investor side, but I'm sure there's still potential there. So maybe speaking on the opposite side of the spectrum, like all the pitches and companies that you see passing through your desk or your screen, I mean, which one are the ones that you are probably less excited around today? In terms of sectors, maybe let's not name anyone here or publicly shame anyone. It's not what we want to do, but it's more about like always interesting to understand on the investor side, like what are the things that are less exciting for them at this point. It might change in the future as always.
Yeah, I would say right now, a sector that's like a little less exciting for me is around vertical farming. That's one that I have covered for a while, and yeah, it's a sector that I'm a little bit less bullish on now. Not because I don't think there's kind of macro themes that make it exciting and important. It's more just like we haven't been able to figure out how to make it economical. And I don't think it's fair to make the average consumer pay a lot more for their food, which is obviously essential for them to survive, especially in this inflationary environment. And so I'm just like a little down on the sector, and it's already absorbed so much capital at this point, and we still haven't cracked that code.
How do you measure impact? Is there any like framework, team of scientists that you rely on to kind of assess, especially at the early days, or any like criteria that you have in place that drives investment? Or it's more about like, okay, we have a strong conviction and we're convinced about that company. What's the framework there? Some funds, as you know, it's like if you're a bit 10 gigaton or 1 gigaton, whatever, that's the company that we want to see. And the rest, unfortunately, is not for us. So how is it on your side?
So we don't have a hard and fast rule for the amount that a certain company needs to abate for us to be excited about the company. Would say we are very thematic in the way we approach the market. So we'll do a deep dive. That's kind of how we get started. And then we find all the companies, similar to how I was describing the mining thing. You know, we have a 60-page deck that we put together internally to back up our thesis on the mining side. We do that by each sector, and we'll actually go pretty deep into subsectors. Like we'll do one just on heat pumps for residential, for example, et cetera, et cetera. And so any deep dive we even start is probably in something that is going to reduce emissions. And that's kind of the start point for us. But we also want to invest in things like the enablement tools. We wouldn't say we only will invest in those, as you can tell from our portfolio companies. Like that's not the case, of course. But we also do think it's important to invest in those in order to actually get the whole system moving. And so just to name a few, we have a carbon accounting company, for example, N0, which is one of the deals I worked on. In and of itself, maybe not decarbonizing, but it's giving people the information so that they can. And then we have a company called EcoCart, which is a kind of e-commerce plugin, API plugin. And again, it's so that you can buy offsets with your shopping cart. Maybe in and of itself, it's more of an enablement tool. But all of these I still think are important. And I say like, no matter how little we're moving the needle, let's move the needle. And that's my philosophy around this. And it's luckily a fifth wall as well. And yeah, we put out an ESG report to our LPs where we go through each company and talk through kind of some of the metrics for each individual company. But during kind of the investment process, we aren't saying like, you must be able to hit 1 gigaton by X year in order for us to invest.
So more personal question here that I always ask to any founders and investors. I mean, what's your personal view on the climate crisis? I mean, what would you say to people who feel like demoralized by all the already visible consequences of climate change? Are we doomed?
Oh, I hope not. Well, I mean, obviously I'm very biased here, right? I've literally dedicated my career to this. So I'm very much on a biased source here. I think there are certain elements that I don't know if are reversible, unfortunately. So I think we will continue to see pretty extreme weather events, especially at least for the next 10 years. My hope is that if we all work together, and genuinely all, every single person who feels a little demoralized, it's like, just genuinely all think about this and work together. I think there's a chance that we mitigate some of the worst parts of it. Like, let's not have another ice age or something, right? So that's kind of my hope for what we can do here. And then one thing that I always also want to kind of put out there when we think about this, your emission as an individual is directly correlated with kind of your like income level. That's just kind of a fact of life. And so a lot of people that are like on the higher income spectrum are also people that are like typically kind of more aware on climate change side, and so have, I think, also more of a responsibility, both in terms of like they can make different life choices and make a choice that is more climate friendly, as well as also kind of having that information handy and also being the bigger culprit.
So speaking about flight, like do you compensate your flight emission? Do you know any good service? Because I'll be definitely interested to see how to compensate that. I haven't found any like legit or reliable service where I could like really compensate my own personal emissions in a way.
Neither have I actually. I did look into kind of carbon accounting tools for the individual, and there are some apps. There are some that kind of up there, but the ones that I came across, I wasn't a massive fan when I was trying to use them myself. So I haven't found a good solution. I do have some friends that pay for like a offset subscription, and so they just pay a monthly fee and just kind of just have that as their offset. So that's kind of another option. I also make other types of choices, right? So it's like, I haven't bought an item of clothing brand new in, I think, 6 years at this point. And so I will only buy secondhand. And so it's like little things to kind of reduce my emissions like that. I don't cook meat in the house, for example. All of these things. So like, I know it's like all these little things, and I have a real problem around food waste. I hate throwing away food. It's a bit that me and my husband always had, that I make him eat everything that's in my fridge before it can't be thrown away. So like little things like that I think can reduce my emission side, but I haven't found an app that I like kind of really like on that side.
Yeah, but I believe in, that's besides the point here, but like really like the offsetting of those planes emission and transport emission, like even when like I need to change car soon, and I will go for electric EV1, but I'm still with some hybrid model type of style.
Yeah.
And I go to a fuel station, and how comes I cannot compensate or reduce once? Like, you know what I mean? I can take the train and stuff like that. But when you cannot, how can you, offset this fuel? But anyway, if you heard anything or for the audience, happy to share that later on the footnotes. How can a community of oh, sorry.
So I was going to say I mean, I never got my driver's license. So technically I'm very sustainable in that regard because I don't drive. So I only ever take public transportation. So that's my also a thing to offset myself. And on the airplane specifically, some airlines do a pretty good job of offsetting from my understanding. Like it seems like Delta does a pretty good job of offsetting. And so I don't know if that's like the Star World Alliance that does that altogether. But a lot of airlines in general, they know that they have kind of a problem, and so have been investing a lot on like SAF and things like that. So maybe we'll not rely on them, but see what tools that they're using to kind of help us make those calculations.
But anyway, if anyone listened to the show today and knows, great solution that are not just greenwashing, because that might be sometimes the red line that we don't want to cross, feel free to shoot us a mail or a message. How can the community of listeners, of founders, experts, investors listening to the show today can help you?
Yeah, I think it's in a couple ways. So for other investors, please reach out. I love kind of growing my VC ecosystem, my like friends in VC. So would love to kind of connect and see if we can share deal flow and co-invest in certain things. I like co-leading, co-following, whatever it may be. Think we all need to be collaborative here in order to actually move the needle. So that's kind of one side. On founders, if there's stuff that I spoke about, certain sectors that you operate in, we cover all things in climate tech. Like, please reach out. If it's not me, there's someone at Fifth Wall that I can definitely pass you along to. And always excited to kind of meet founders and in person or over Zoom. And we have team members that are based on the West Coast, East Coast, and now me in London as well on the climate tech side. And then for experts, whenever we go through kind of diligence process, like as I already mentioned with mining, if we were to do a drilling investment, for example, I would need an expert to help me with that diligence process. Like, I am not the right person. I'm not, it's like, I don't think I'm not arrogant enough to think that I should be the person to evaluate that. If you kind of have that background, I would love to hear from you and kind of include you in our network so that we can start like leveraging much deeper knowledge that you have and your expertise.
Any question I should have asked you and I did not for this first part of the interview?
I don't think so. I feel like we covered a lot of ground here. So yeah, there wasn't anything that kind of immediately pops to mind. There isn't anything that immediately popped to mind.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for all of your super valuable insights and spending so much time with us, but also with all of those founders and understanding the ecosystem, supporting the ecosystem as well towards helping to contribute to solve this massive problem that you are all facing. So thank you so much for pushing the ball towards a cleaner world.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I love it. I wouldn't do anything else.
Thanks again for joining us on the Tech for Climate podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. Stay tuned next week for more climate tech insights. In the meantime, head on over to our webpage at startupbasecamp.org, where we have lots more insights and resources for anyone wanting to get involved in climate tech. If you find our resources useful, please consider donating to support our small self-funded team. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends, and see you next time.